Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Wild and Woolly Ozarks. I'm your host, Champion Herren, here with my producer, Kenneth Herren, and we are going to bring you another action-packed segment of, this time, Ozarks True Crime. I want to give you a little background, perhaps, and I'm starting off with a very specific true crime, one that I'm currently writing up with some others to go in a book. It'll be coming out. It's always coming out later rather than sooner, seems like. But today I'm coming to you from the parlor of the old Ravenaugh Stonehouse Stock Farm on Dry Creek, which is an upper arm of the James in southern Webster County. And I'm going to start there because when I returned to the farm, the intent was, been in the back of my head for years. I had some things that I wanted to write about. I had some things that I wanted to, some stories to tell. This podcast is simply a continuation of that. Some of these have been printed up in the Marshfield Mail and other publications, and some have not. Some are still either in process or being worked on. The lynching of Richard Cullen in Marshfield, February of 1892, is one such story. And let me explain. One night, the boys and I were sitting around the kitchen table, and I had decided that I was going to write up some Webster County history that I thought maybe had been inadequately, up until now, presented. There were some very good, there'd been some very good local research done on some issues, and I kind of wanted to go with the lynching of Dick Cullen and the murder of Clifford Vere Shaw. They're the same story. So part of that started, I went to the cemetery to see if I could find the grave of Clifford Vere Shaw. When I was a child, the aging druggist who was no longer a druggist, he had quit the trade by that point, Earl Shields. My parents, being in real estate, had sold some property for Earl, and Earl's family lived away, and several times Earl Shields had spent Christmas Day with us. That was a tradition that went back into the 40s, where the Shields and the Herrens always visited on Christmas, because they lived down the street from one another when my father was a child, long before they'd moved out to the farm here. And so Earl Shields called on Dad for things that he might need, and different things. If he had a problem, he called on, and of course my parents were good friends with their daughters too. So Dad looked out for Earl. And so Earl said, "Can you drive me?" He'd gotten to where he couldn't drive, and he may have already been in the apartments at the nursing home, but he said, "Can you run me out to the cemetery?" Now, I would have been about 8, 9 years old, so we're talking early 80s. And if you're from Marshfield and you recall the early 80s, the cemetery, there were a lot more trees than there were then. You know, we're talking pre the ice storm in 87, I think it was. And we're talking it was started in 86 and I think went into 87. We're talking pre the 07 ice storm. We're talking, there's been a wave or two of Dutch elm disease in the meantime. It's wiped a lot of stuff out. So there's a lot of trees that are missing. Well, Earl took and put flowers on his wife, Jo, who was a good friend of my grandmother's grave. And we were walking around, and he had been telling my father about where the cyclone, the mass graves were, and Dad wanted him to show it to him. So we it seems like we even circled back around and came into the old part. So Earl had the very minimal to walk, because I think we'd ended up putting some graves on our family, and we were together in the cemetery at one point. So we came back, and he was showing these mass graves where dozens of people were buried after the 1880 cyclone. And I was standing there, and there was this small, little kind of white Carrara or alabaster marble. I don't even know if that's correct, but it's what it looked like. It sounds good on the radio here. I call this the radio, and it's not the radio. On the podcast. So I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's the grave of the baby that Dick Cullen threw down a well." And I'd heard about this because my father loved local history. We had the book. I'd already seen the picture of Dick Cullen hanging. And so, yeah, I was like, wow. And Dad said, "Is that right?" Well, so fast forward almost 40 years later, and I'm pretty sure I can pick out the spot, but the marker's gone. And maybe the marker's just under the grass. Maybe it was broken. Maybe they didn't really even know where it went to begin with. And maybe, there's always the chance that Earl was mistaken. I'd like to believe Earl was right, because Earl was my hero. Still is kind of my hero. So that's where it all started. And I said, I've got to figure out everything I can about that story. And so since that time, I have put together a lot of information, a lot of stuff that do not, nobody knows. And so this whole episode, I'm just going to stop right here and say this whole episode is going to be very Marshfield centric. I want, when I go into a community, and I've got others that are coming up, I want to make it as centric to that community as I can, because that's important to the people that live there. That's their history. And that also just adds another layer of realism. I want you to know that I've researched this, and I know what I'm talking about when I'm up here. I'm not just, throwing pasta on the wall and see what happens to stick. I've done the best I can on my part to make this factual, entertaining, interesting, aside from not being able to talk correctly as is apparent. Maybe a cup of coffee will help here. Let me get a drink. My throat was getting sticky. A little bit of allergies out here on the farm. So while you're at it, while we're on a little pause here, go ahead and hit that subscribe and like button and tell us what you think. We still haven't gotten into the main story here, but we're getting ready to. So at that point, what I did is, and this is sort of the background of this podcast too, is I just did a Google search on Dick Cullen. And as naive a person as I probably am, I pulled up and I said, oh my gosh, all these newspapers are online. Holy crap. Well, I just immediately subscribed to newspapers.com, and with that soon after to Ancestry. And then I soon found out that I could really just absolutely come up with stuff that I'd never dreamed I could. My researching mindset was still in college when I had to go to Meyer Library and look through reels and microfilm. And in fact, to do the Dick Cullen research I wanted, I had already committed to going and spending a day or two or three to get the Springfield Democrat, the News and Leader, or the News and Leader, or the Leader and Press, whichever whichever version of the Springfield News Leader was available at the time, maybe the Republican or the Patriot. And so it opened up a whole new world for me. And so I just took a couple months and started reading newspapers from 100 years ago. Soon after that, I came up with a first working version of the story of the murder of Clifford Vere Shaw. And that was not really that good. just to be truthful about it, I decided to write a fictional account of what happened the day of the investigation. And it's tripe. I'm not even being hard on myself. It's just tripe. But what it did do is it allowed me to organize my thoughts into what actually happened that day. And it caused me to pull from all my sources. There is no really good, solid account of the coroner's jury or of the investigation that day. You have to piece it together from multiple sources because, and then I will tell you where I depart from what I know and where I'm making kind of a leap. Okay? So this whole story started me down a line. It's led to multiple articles in the Marshfield Mail on crime and on murder and cemetery, just other little off things. You end up never knowing where the rabbit trail will lead. And by golly, I went down the hole, came out the other end, went down a trail, been down multiple holes since then, and have enjoyed every minute of it. And ultimately, the culmination of a lot of this is this podcast. And so that's the background on it. At 11 some minutes into this, if you're still with us, that's how we got here. So without anything further to share with you, I give you the legend, it's not really a legend, it's fact, the lynching of Dick Cullen and the murder of the little boy, the orphan, Clifford Vere Shaw. The Marshfield of the early 1890s was vastly different. After the Civil War, it was sort of a rough and rollicking frontier town as the natural resources in the area where timber was being hauled in and the fields opened up. The rich farmland of Webster County produced bounteous amounts of grain crops, and in the 1890s, people with the railroad were exploiting the opportunity to grow things such as apples and peaches and strawberries. This is the beginning of the tomato canning period, which is going to last for another 40, 50, or maybe even 60 years afterwards. So to say that while the country was in a downturn through part of the 1890s, to say that Webster County and Marshfield in particular were not booming would be ridiculous. You also had the first hints of mining opportunities for lead and for zinc and for which they call jack, and maybe possibly for aluminum, although people were trying to figure out what to do with bauxite. And these occurred in the tunnel mines and several large mines around the area. The whole Turnbow region was explored and mined. This drove up real estate prices tremendously, and with influxes of people coming in to mine and to take advantage. And I'm not talking little mines. I'm talking some of these were over 100 feet deep, and they exploited big deposits of lead, and then simply that was all there was to it. They died out. By World War I, there was virtually no mining going on of any scale in some of these counties around Springfield. The most of the mineral was, at that point, all the easy stuff had been gotten, and it wasn't economically feasible to pull out more. Suffice to say, not going down a rabbit hole on mining here, but suffice to say, businesses were booming. City lots were over the next several years going to multiply in value. Housing was going to multiply in value. Things like hotels would be sold several times over because they had gone up in value so much, and other establishments. Hardware stores would not be able to keep stock of just basic stuff because there was mining that was going on as a boom. Several of our principal characters we're going to meet in this story also were involved in mining. So I want to start with that in mind. Marshfield was a town on the move. The railroad had been here now for the better part of 20 years, and 25 years, actually, more like it. We had a new courthouse, or a modern courthouse, and then the cyclone had taken it out, and we had they had rebuilt it. Most of the square was rebuilt. It was still a mud street, and mud flowing down Crittenden Street, if you can imagine that, all the way down to where the fairgrounds is. The fairgrounds itself was a lake, and Shackleford Spring way upstream, and a series of other springs that follow that had a lake that young people ice skated on, and was cut for ice for a period of time. Notable institutions in Marshfield, the Masons and the Oddfellows, and the Red Men, and the Good Templars, the temperance version of, and it kind of a tightly associated with the Methodist Episcopal Church north, and I think south too. That was a Civil War thing. So that's the Marshfield of the late 1880s and the 1890s. Now, some of the primary movers and shakers in town we're going to meet along the way. We're also going to meet a family that moves in. We're going to meet an orphan, and we're going to have some heroes and some villains. So our story begins in 1888, and I'm going to read from the official history of Webster County, which is very, very, very tiny. And it says, on the night in the year 1888, a tiny baby was found on the doorstep of Mr. Oliver Wells, who was the postmaster. It is alleged to have been left there by a woman who alighted from an eastbound train. Okay? So, the official history of this whole event is less than 500 words. And that doesn't even do it justice. So we're going to start with the family named Shaw. So Hiram Shaw was born in 1825 approximately in New York. He had migrated westward and ended up in Darlington, Wisconsin, Lafayette County. Here he had established himself as a representative for several leading varieties of fruit, or the companies in the East who were selling them out west. And he was an orchardist. He had, at one time, he had a 60-acre orchard. He had a cider works. Hold on. Okay, he had 8. I had to stop because the microphone was messing with me looking at what I was doing here. But he had 800 to 1,000 bearing apple trees. He had grapes, several acres of grapes. He had nursery beds where you would get off the boxcar the latest peach and apple and other varieties. He would then graft them. So he had beds and beds and beds of berries and up-and-coming trees. And he had ornamental trees, out there, kind of a prairie area. You want shade trees and you want windbreak trees. He sold those as well. So he was a very successful man. He had never married, and Somewhere in the 1870s, he marries Sarah, pardon me, Kate is the daughter. He marries Sarah Cullen, who has basically been abandoned and granted a divorce by her husband. She has 3 children. There's a 4th, may have died. We lose track of him completely. Richard, the son, goes with the father, and we find him in the 1880 census living in Chicago in a rooming house with a cousin. We find the girls in the 1880 census as Kate and Maud Shaw, living with Hiram Shaw. Now, James Cullen, Dick's father, was a hard-driving, mean, tight-fisted man, and he ran gangs of large-scale carpenters and ended up in the barrel works business, finally settling in Charles City, Iowa, where he had a large cooperage that would supply municipal water systems, water towers, train cars to transport oil or kerosene or something like that. So that was the business which he was gaining. He ended up making a lot of money. Dick kind of, probably from the time he was about 16 or so, just basically migrated around the countryside. And so he ends up showing up in Darlington, and he is nothing but trouble for Hiram Shaw. In fact, it's so bad that by the middle 1880s, Hiram Shaw has posted that he wants to sell out his all of his stuff, and he wants to relocate to another part of the country. Okay? Well, that's not unusual if you think about it. Hiram Shaw would be in his late 60s or mid-60s at that point. Well, an orchard with 1,200 trees and 800 grapevines would be a heck of a thing to keep up with, particularly if you're having trouble with health. And I don't know that he was ever really sick. Hiram Shaw was always described as a little active, industrious, wiry little man. And Dick Cullen, in contrast, was 6 foot and probably 200 pounds. He was a big brute of a fella. So old Sarah Shaw was always trying to steer Dick Cullen right. She was always trying to get him to settle down. She was always trying to get him to get into a trade or find something to do. She had hoped that maybe he would take to orcharding, but he was nothing but a nuisance. And so sometime in 1886 or 7, the Shaws sell out, and they announced to everybody they are going to Kansas. Well, the interesting thing is, and I'm going to correct something here that I have, some of this has previously been stated in the Ozarks Folk Chronicle podcast on this event, and I'm going to correct a few things here if possible. I can't find where the Shaws actually went to Kansas. I find a Hiram Shaw on the Kansas side just of Kansas City for a while. I find a Hiram Shaw in a few counties over who's farming. I don't know where they lose track of them basically for a year. And then in 1887, late 87 or early 88, they land in Marshfield. So meaning Hiram and Sarah Shaw and the 2 daughters, Kate and Maud. So Dick Cullen shows up later in 1889. We'll get back to that. So the Shaws have money. They are members of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Hiram Shaw purchases a house, a nice house with a big front room on the in sort of the Temple Baptist neighborhood south of the railroad tracks in Marshfield. He has an acreage, and he immediately starts filling that up with plants and different things so he can peddle them, like he's always done. He just doesn't want a big orchard. I think that's part of it. And other than that, the Shaws seem to live a very comfortable life. Well, let's enter into what I had read you earlier about a baby being left at Oliver Wells's house. So, in February of 1888, this woman leaves this baby in Marshfield. Now, here's where my research really began to depart from the accepted tale. So, there is no news report of the baby being left. All the 1888 papers in Marshfield, the Chronicle, the Republican Standard, the Marshfield Mail did not exist at this point. The Tribune are all gone. They're just no copies that we know of that exist. Part of that is because at the same time, the grand jury in Marshfield was the ball knobber stuff was going on. And so I think a whole lot of those papers have been taken from that period because that was going on at the same time. And the Marshfield Chronicle, given the fact that the grand jury sat in Marshfield, had a great seat to it. So we don't have any record of the baby being left or other than this. So she evidently came on the train. She gets off. She goes into town for a little distance, and then the person who's manning the station sees her just right before the train to Springfield departs back, and didn't realize until afterward, when the baby was found, that she'd left without the baby. Just, I saw her earlier. It didn't even occur to him. So the Wellses have 3 children, ages 5, 6, and 7. Oliver and Martha have a nice big family, and they don't need another child. And so the child gets passed around for 3 or 4 families and over a couple of weeks until it finally ends up with Hiram and Sarah Shaw. Now, the Shaws, Hiram Shaw has never had any children of his own. He has the 2 stepdaughters who are marrying age and are off to, not going to be there long. So they adopt the child, and he becomes absolutely infatuated with this little boy. He loves this little boy, and he takes the little boy with him in his horse-drawn hack, all around town. He's always seen with the little boy. He sits there with the little boy on his lap. So this little boy is a true ray of sunshine into this old man, or this aging man, I guess. He's old for the time. This aging man's life. And so that baby is christened Clifford Vere Shaw. Now, Clifford Vere Shaw is a rambunctious 4-year-old. He is, like I said, the light of his father's life. His mother, his adopted mother, is very loving towards him. In fact, the older girls get on to her and say, well, pulling what older kids always do, saying, well, you never let us get away with that. And she kind of shushes them, lets them be. And before long, in 1889, into this house with now 2 older girls and a baby, comes Dick Cullen. So Dick Cullen drifts into Marshfield in 1889, and it is here for a matter of weeks, and all of a sudden, a lawman from Nebraska shows up with extradition papers for him. communicated to the governor of Missouri from the governor of Nebraska. The sheriff, his name is Smiley, is from Seward County, Nebraska, where they have just experienced a horrific murder. There is a family named Levitt, and the mother and the father, and perhaps some of the other siblings were gone for the evening, and they were left alone on the farm. And when they came back, both daughters had the daughters they left at home, Elizabeth and Carolyn, and they're aged like I want to say like 16 and 9, but there's multiple accounts that give the younger one's age is wrong. So that's my best guess. And their throats are slit. It is plausible, we're in the days before rape kits and modern forensic science, that they have both been violated. And so they are, this murder is like the biggest thing that's happened. And this man, Dick Cullen, who had been in the area, Richard Cullen, the same one, he had been in the area. And guess what? The next morning he was seen with blood all over his clothes. And when a group of men started talking about the murder, he made a beeline and took off. So they arrest him and they ask him a few questions. And they find out that he's even got a knife, kind of like what would have been used, and they let him go. Well, a few weeks later, they really want to talk to him when they realize that he's been set free. And so Sheriff Smiley falls in with a gang of tramps, of which Cullen was or had been a part of, and sort of follows the trail down to Marshfield, Missouri. And there's no account of this happening other than the Nebraska papers reporting on it. Evidently, Cullen cheerfully said, well, I didn't do that. I have proof. I was in Grand Island in a hotel, and I'll be happy I'll even pay my own train fare to go up there and clear my name. So they depart, and they go up there, and Cullen, and so here's the Nebraska papers. The Nebraska papers are like, well, he's going to be indicted, and then we're going to have this just the next term of court when we try him and convict him, and then we'll hang him sometime. It's most certain. This is a done deal. So, what happens is that he gets up there. He shows some receipts. He talks to him. He explains away. The grand jury, who's been waiting to just basically indict him, is satisfied, and he's released and paid train and reimbursed and released. And so he's like, so if that still exists, I want to get a hold of that grand jury testimony. An attorney friend of mine tells me that I'm going to play hell getting it, but I think we'll still play hell. So I want to see what he said. I also think there may be some more information about Dick Cullen that we don't know, that I'd like to have an opportunity to review and to look at. But suffice to say, Dick Cullen explains away a double murder, a highly charged, highly community is sensitive and wants revenge double murder, and leaves. So Dick Cullen drifts in and out, and he is constantly a problem for Hiram Shaw. No matter what his mother tries to help him with or say to him or whatever, he is constantly a problem. And so it is the winter of 1891-92 that Cullen comes back for the final time. And at this point, Hiram Shaw, knowing that he is approaching 70, is wanting to protect both his bride and his new son. And so he is consulting with Sam Dickey, his attorney, to get something set up for the boy. Now, In February of, I'm looking at newspapers.com here. So on Tuesday, the 23rd of February, Monday, the 22nd of February, Dick Cullen, who has been carousing around town and who just a few days ago was forced to go up to the railhead and help bring home nursery stock, and said some pretty belligerent things about his stepfather and his stepbrother. Dick Cullen's out running around town. He's up at the Chitty House drinking beer, or maybe one of the blind tigers like Stub Blunt's Grocery or Colonel Paul's Drugstore. Anyway, long about dark, well after dark, long about closing time, he heads back to the house, and he finds his mother up. Now, the setup of the house, as I understand it, was that Dick Cullen and the child shared a bed in the rear of the house, in the rear bedroom. So while Dick Cullen was out running around, Miss Shaw had gone ahead and put little Clifford after supper into bed and to be asleep. When Dick Cullen comes home, supposedly, he goes in and tells his mother, "Where's the kid?" And she says, "He's in bed in there." And so they get up and they go look, and they can't find the child. So what do? Just go to bed. Now, I'm a parent. Many of you listening to this are parents. You go in and your child is missing in the middle of a winter night. What do? So that's the account that's printed up in the papers. I don't believe that. What had happened is Dick Cullen had made away with little Clifford Veershaw. We're going to get into that. So the next morning, Hiram Shaw gets up and he can't find Clifford anywhere. And he's upset. And Dick Cullen, something is said about, well, I think it's his family that came and got him. So the other side note is to this whole thing, and if you read these old newspaper accounts, it doesn't ever say who, but it is rumored that Clifford Veershaw is the illegitimate son of one of Marshfield's notable families. And so there's that dynamic. That's what Dick Cullen says. I think her people came back and got him, which is odd. So what it amounts to is that this baby's just missing. So Hiram Shaw searches all about the place. He goes and he talks to the neighbors. The neighbors start searching the entire neighborhood. There's all kinds of things going on, and finally, the baby is just gone. The little kid is not gone, is just gone. And so he gets his horse and his hack, and he goes up to the courthouse. And as Sam Dickey, the prosecuting attorney, who is also his attorney, his private attorney, is coming to his office, he finds Hiram Shaw there waiting for him. Now, he is, by Dickey's account later, Hiram Shaw is distressed. He is upset. He is fearful that Dick Cullen has already done something with the child. Dickey wastes no time and runs across from the courthouse and gets Sheriff John Wesley Hubbard. John Wesley Hubbard was a great big tall man. Great big with big broad shoulders and a walrus-like mustache. A powerful man. It'd take more than a dozen men to hold him down if he had the mind to go elsewhere. His brother-in-law, Lee Harmon, is there also. So the two lawmen are going to head back to the Shaw home when a prominent Marshfieldian, unfortunately it doesn't say who, comes up and says, "I heard the following." that Cullen said he would get it all if Shaw and the boy were dead. With that knowledge, they gather up township, the Ozark Township Constable, which was Alf Stovall, goodness, and they gather up the Marshfield City Marshal, which is Newt Edmonds. He ran the flour mill. So Stovall was more than likely the first one on the scene, as he would have been on horseback. And so he evidently made it over there and kind of surveyed the area first. Search parties were now going up and down the railroad, all north of town. They were covering the roads in and out of town. The whole town was looking for this child. Well, so the lawmen get to the Shaw residence, and Sarah Shaw lets them in, and she is visibly shaken. She does not look right. She's almost mute. She's non-communicative, I guess is the best way you could put this. And so Dick Cullen, and this is where I'm taking a guess here because multiple sources hint around this. Dick Cullen makes a move on Lee Harmon. And I've said this before because I've studied Lee Harmon pretty thoroughly. I don't care how mean Dick Cullen was, Lee Harmon was meaner, and he was a lot more experienced. And he basically puts Cullen down on the ground and puts him in cuffs and has him remove his shoes. So I'm gonna circle back to that in a minute. Has him remove his shoes, finds out he's got both pistol and a knife on him, disarms him. Now, a whole bunch of this case centers on and by the way, Cullen at this point is arrested on suspicion in the disappearance of Clifford Veershaw. At this point, the case is going to hinge on the last 48 hours of weather. The whole week before, this is a Tuesday morning, okay? The whole week before has been overcast, but it's been dry. Everybody's been clearing out their gardens, getting work done. The temperatures have been moderate, but still on the cool side. Then all of a sudden, it freezes, and it warms up a little, and it snows. And then the snow freezes, it melts part of the way, and then the snow freezes. And that's what has happened leading up to this Tuesday morning. There's a hard freeze on everything. Well, when Sam Dickey gets there, the first thing he does is have Edmonds and Stovall clear the entire yard, because there's a crowd of people who've been looking for the baby, who are concerned about the baby, who just curiosity seekers who want to know what's going on. And so they are, they've been all through the yard. The yard is completely mashed down. And so, like two bloodhounds, Alf Stovall and Newt Edmonds begin going around and trying to find tracks. Whose tracks are whose? They go to the privy. That would be the natural place to start for members of the household, to identify who's who. Okay. Well, Dick Cullen was handsome, and he was charming, and he had a way with the ladies, and he loved to ice skate. Being raised up north, I guess that fits. He had his shoes scalloped. He'd had them resoled, and they had put some unusual pegs in them to keep them together. And then they had resoled and scalloped the soles so he could wear skates. So you have a heel that has a groove right down the middle with these unusual pegging around. So when Stovall and Edmonds get a hold of his shoes, it is literally, if you look at the papers and try to kind of piece all of them together as one, it is literally an hour, and they find a trail. And that trail goes around by the barn, and it goes back over through some orcharding beds, almost as if trying to conceal what they're doing. And then when it gets off behind some brush and some other trees, the steps become very, very, very far apart as they run to the south toward the railroad. Toward the railroad. North to the railroad. So we are talking, for those of you who know Marshfield right now, we are talking, the best I can tell until I get something else to prove differently, as I am thinking that lot right in front of Temple Baptist is where they tracked Dick Cullen. I'm pretty convinced that the well is behind that triplex that sits between the towing company and Geyer Oil. There was a well right there at one point. I'm convinced that's it. Until I can show something different, I think that's the most logical conclusion. So they follow these frozen prints, okay, all the way to an old well. There'd been some stockyards there, and it was a way to water animals that were going to be heading out on the railroad. It had since been abandoned, and all around it are the prints with scalloped heels and these odd pegs. Dick Cullen's prints all the way around that well. So they go back and they tell Sheriff Hubbard what they found. Sheriff Hubbard sees that this could potentially get out of hand, and so he wants Dick Cullen in jail. So Alf Stovall is taking him up to lodge him in jail, and he mentions that they have found tracks that cut across there. And Cullen, for all his skill of talking himself out of the Levitt deal, is just downright stupid when answering questions this time, evidently. And he says, well, that's whoever must have took the baby. He'd also said up until that point, when Shaw asked him where the child was, that if you give me $100, I'll go find him. Stupid comment number one. Stupid comment number two. Stovall then says, we're going to go drag the old well over there by the old stockyards. And Cullen then turns to him and says, then I am finished. Well, if you're trying to avoid murder charges, that's not what you say. Excuse me. So, they take Cullen to jail. They go ahead and they arrest Sarah Shaw, too, because she won't answer a question, or every answer she gives is evasive, as an accessory, because although they don't take her to jail readily, they end up putting her under arrest. She's not really in good shape mentally. There's some concern on that, and I think they want the doctor to come around. The doctor, Dr. John Jolly, one of the physicians of Marshfield, another hero of mine, is conducting a search party north of town and is called back in to act as county coroner. And so Dr. Jolly, long about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they go over and they surround the little well, and by this time they've got a crowd with them, and on the second try they grab the bedclothes of the blue-drowned Clifford Vere Shaw. He has fastened around his neck a heavy piece of copper wire and the coupling car link that railroads use to link cars together. And as I understand it, those car links weigh 12 to 15 pounds, and there are some that may weigh more. It is never specific what type of car, for you railroad enthusiasts out there, it's never specific what type of car link it is. So, I guess this was for weight. So, now, with a dead body, the coroner has to install a jury. And so that evening, and remember, we're still Tuesday here, that evening, Dr. John Jolly assembles a coroner's jury in the courthouse, in the circuit courtroom. In the middle is the body of Clifford Vere Shaw, and Hiram and Sarah Shaw are sitting there. Lee Harmon, who ends up doing a lot of the other detective work on this, had sat there and interrogated Cullen the whole time the search was on. And basically none of Cullen's statements add up. None of his story even makes sense. And then he says the thing they call Stovall to the stand. Stovall says, yes, that's what he said. Okay? So the coroner's jury ends at 10 o'clock, reconvenes the next morning, I believe at 10 o'clock. Cullen is brought over, and he is examined. And after a while, he just stops answering questions. And so this is now Wednesday morning. The town is full of people. The town is absolutely full of people. Sam, the coroner's jury, the courthouse is packed. The courthouse was packed the night before. The courthouse is packed this day. Okay? The courthouse is packed every day this week. Just clue you all in. And so the courthouse is packed again. Dick Cullen's testimony doesn't add up. The jury determines that the child's neck was broken beforehand, but it was done by Dick Cullen, who then covered up the body, or tried to cover up the crime. So Hubbard hustles him back to the jail, friend. Somebody's going to take him right there, and gets him back, puts him in the jail, and locks him up, and adds deputies. Mac Adams, and G.W. Thompson, and F.F. Brannick, and a couple others. Clay Shannon, who later becomes editor of the Marshfield Mail, are all armed up and helping Lee Harmon and Sheriff Hubbard. Now, so Sarah Shaw is now charged as an accessory to murder before and after the fact. She is lodged in the women's jail. The missioners from the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, of which both Sarah and Hiram Shaw are members, are catering to her needs. They are concerned that she is insane at this point, that she has had such a shock that she's insane. And I'm just going to say insanity is a broadly brushed term in Victorian era for anybody who goes through a stressful situation. So they're worried that she's insane. There are women's quarters in the jail. In the jail I'm talking about stood approximately where the post office does now. Okay, that's important. So on Wednesday, that's Wednesday. On Thursday, the funeral for Clifford Vere Shaw is conducted back in the circuit courtroom. The courthouse is filled. The poor little child's body is conveyed over to the city cemetery and laid to rest. I have a picture of everybody that has a Webster County historical book has a picture of the dead baby. On a funny note, KY3 got in trouble for airing that one time when I went on and told them about it. They didn't realize it was dead. Like, I'm here to talk to you about a murder. What do you think it is? Anyway. So Thursday, Hubbard wants to get Dick Cullen and take him to Springfield. Every alleyway, there are men, and there are armed men blocking every road in groups of like 6 and 8, every way he goes. He makes one attempt at it and decides not to. So on Thursday, there are also reporters in and out of the jail. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch has reporters down there, the Springfield Democrat, the Leader and Press. They've all interviewed Dick Cullen, and Dick Cullen says things like, "I have hitherto seen the rope they plan to hang me with. And I got out of the deal in Nebraska. I figure I'll get out of this one too." Well, buddy, it ain't looking too good. Let me just tell you. So the town is basically an armed camp. Hubbard can't do anything about it. His green deputies are armed to the teeth. And Friday is even worse because there are more people in town. So long about Friday night, somebody went on patrol and came back and said, town's dead. And they sit there and they breathe a sigh of relief. And they're like, maybe everybody's calmed down. It's going to let the law take its course. And so what it amounts to is they were expecting someone to bring food. And there was a light rap at the door, like a lady's rap. And Hubbard happened to answer the door when he was overpowered and seized by 6 men. Now, if that had been Lee Harmon, he'd have shot somebody that had answered the door. I have no doubt about it, because he was trigger happy to begin with. And if it was one of those other fellows, they'd have gotten hurt. But he looks around, and all around the jail is an army of upwards of 100 men, all wearing either black or white masks. Now, part of I'm going to stop right here. Webster County never had ball knobbers per se, but there were members of the ball knobbers in Webster County. And at one point, a few years before, 100-some ball knobbers had rode around the square with black masks on. That's from Ball Knobber book. I want to say the Lucille Morris Upton one. I'm sure if there's those out there who know better than I that can correct me, but I'm off the top of my head, I think that is. I find that just kind of a curious connection. So Hubbard is seized by 6 men. Hubbard's a big man. It took, and then more, they secure him, and there's a front room before they get back where all the other deputies are, and Hubbard gives them the keys. And he has to tell the others to lay down. They say, we don't want to hurt you. And he says, I will die protecting my prisoner. And they come in with sledgehammers and say, we're just going to take all the doors off this place. Because it was old, nasty native brick anyway. The people were digging out with pocket knives just a few years later out of the brick walls of the jail. So it wasn't like it was that secure of a structure. Hubbard is afraid he's going to get somebody hurt. He's afraid he has other prisoners up there who, if you're lynching one, you might as well lynch a couple more, because one of them's a rapist and one of them's something. I think there's another murderer up there. And so he gives them the keys. And this mob is quiet. They don't do anything. They go up, and Dick Cullen says, what do you want? And they say, we're here for you. And they grab him and bind his hands behind him, and they put a rope around his neck. Now, Cullen don't have any shoes. His shoes are evidence, and he was been asleep for the last hour or so. He's in his underwear. He's not wearing his pants. So he gets led down with the rope around his neck out the door and pulled out the front door, and the mob leaves. Well, they tell Hubbard not to do anything. So Hubbard leaves the jail, and he goes and gets Sam Dickey. And they go over there, and they try to stop this. And they are just confronted with a sea of men who just say, don't go any further. Some of them are armed. As far as I know, they're not threatened or they're not anything like that. But they basically hold them at bay. And they take Cullen to the east side of the courthouse. If you look at old pictures of the old courthouse, it's would be close to where the World War I memorial was before they built the new courthouse. And there is a maple tree there. It's a small maple tree. It's one that's been planted since the cyclone. And they take him under that tree, and they say, is your mother guilty? And he says, my mother had nothing to do with this. Or by some accounts, I know nothing of my mother's guilt, implying that maybe she was guilty. Who knows? And they say, what about, he replied also, by some accounts, that he was not guilty. Sometimes he doesn't. But ultimately, they pepper him with questions, and Cullen says, fine, pull your damn rope. And so the rope is thrown over a small limb, only about 9 feet off the ground, and multiple hands raised Dick Cullen up and wafted him into eternity. And shortly after he stops kicking, the mob disperses into small groups, and when they're sure he's dead, the leader of the mob orders his body be left there until sunrise, and as quickly and as silently as they came, they're gone. Well, Sam Dickey's got another crime scene, so he posted the deputies out there to guard it, and Dr. Jolly, the coroner, you recall him, he is in Niangua delivering a baby, so he didn't even get back for another hour and a half, at which point he cuts him down, and then Dick Cullen is placed in the circuit courtroom on the same table that his victim had been just days before. Now, the town had been on edge and tense for days and days, and this is the explosion that settled everything down. The town is dead. The town is described as really calm in the coming days. Now, part of this is kind of funny because the reactions to it in the paper, the Marshfield Chronicle is very much in favor of it and praises the lynch mob for how resolute they were and how swift they were in bringing justice to the murderer of Clifford Vere Shaw. And it's almost hard to read, but that's how people felt. In fact, the Marshfield Chronicle is convinced that this act alone will continue our economic boom. So, guess it's good to be known for something. Okay, so now that Clifford, the murder of Clifford Vere Shaw has been avenged, kind of wonder, I'm going to tell you what happened to everybody. So Dick Cullen, the next morning, is in front of he was laying in front of a coroner's jury who determined that his life was taken by person and persons unknown. And if you look in the Webster County history book, there's a picture of him hanging. And if you go about 4 pages before, you realize he's hanging in a photographic studio. And so evidently Dick Cullen was taken over. His hands were rebound in front of him this time. The newspaper's very specific. His hands were rebound in front of him, and he and his drawers are lifted up into the photographic studio. I know it's a photographic studio because if you look 4 page over, the Cyclone Band is in front of the same set. So just a little local inside Marshfield historical humor there for you. So they take Dick Cullen, they hang him up again, they photograph him, and I asked a funeral director, he thought that Dick Cullen had been hung up there relatively fresh before they took him to the coroner's jury. We have no way of knowing that, but his thought was, by the way the body was done, that was done in a relatively short time after the hanging. I don't think it's ever been stated when or where. No one knows where that original photograph is. In fact, the Marshfield Chronicle for the week after the lynching, those 2 are gone, and they're not on newspapers.com. If you have them, boy howdy, would we love to scan them and have them at the museum, because they're going to tell a lot more about the aftermath. We know that Provost Marshall came to Marshfield, and the Provost Marshal posted guards around the square for a day and then went home. Then met with the county court, meaning the commissioners, then went home. Dick Cullen, the burial party for Dick Cullen, got rip-roaring drunk and put him in a cheap suit of clothes and drove at breakneck speed around the square a couple of times, hooting and hollering on his way to the cemetery. So the Republican Standard, there's only one copy of it left, and one page of one copy of it left, to be truthful, and it chastises these men as if they should be of better character, and the office holders, and I guess there were some office holders involved in this. Nothing quite that colorful goes on in our courthouse today, unfortunately. But there were some office holders, and the Republican Standard says the voters will remember this at the ballot box. Well, who knows? Who knows what office holders, and who knows whether the voters remembered or not. So Sarah Shaw is not prosecuted for the as an accessory to the murder of her adopted son. Hiram Shaw immediately puts his place up for sale, but getting no buyers, goes back to selling fruit, trees and plants and different things, advertises in the local paper. In 1898 or 96, he moves to Conway, and then in 1899 he dies. He's buried in the Conway Cemetery, and I believe Sarah is buried there too. He never lost faith in his wife. He wanted her bailed out. He did bail her out the first chance he got, and he never doubted her innocence. The monument reflects, in honor of my husband Hiram Shaw, by your loving wife Sarah. The girls, Kate and Maud, I have tried to reach out to to descendants of them. They're the ancestors. To descendants of them to see if they want to know this story. So far I haven't found anybody. I found some ancestry entries, but they end up in Colorado and Wisconsin. The Seward County paper, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, and I'm not going to look. The Seward County papers and the papers around Seward, Nebraska, all bemoan the lynching of Dick Cullen as, wow, we missed our chance. We really, that was the guy that did this, had to be the guy that did this. That's how it works. So, John Wesley Hubbard, Lee Harmon is involved in shooting after shooting as town marshal and is ultimately relieved of his duties. John Wesley Hubbard does not run for sheriff again. He was a popular sheriff. He loved the job of being sheriff. He would have ran again, but this stays with him the rest of his life. He regrets his decision of handing over those keys for the rest of his life. John Wesley Hubbard dies in 1917. He is working as a patrolman in Springfield. Alf Stovall and Newt Edmonds both stay around. Stovall eventually relocates to Springfield. He is a bondsman. He's street superintendent. He's city collector. He has every little government job you can imagine and is in charge of all the roaming livestock in Marshfield at one point. Newt Edmonds owns the roller mill, which burns down, and they rebuild it, and then eventually he sells it off, and he runs for mayor of Marshfield and doesn't win. Dr. John Jolly, who is coroner, is an alderman of Marshfield, ends up becoming mayor later. Sam Dickey, the prosecutor, remains prosecutor except for maybe 1 or 2 terms until his death in the 20s. Long-time public servant, one of the men who built the community up. So that is basically the story of Clifford Vere Shaw. And I'm afraid every time I record one of these, there's going to be new information I find that then I'm going to have to go back and correct it. But I guess we just have to understand it's a work in progress. I want to thank you for staying with us through this. That's quite a haul. I want to thank you for tuning in and hitting that like button and hitting that subscribe button or giving us a review. It all helps out. I want to thank my producer, Kenneth Herren, who's my son, and who does an amazing job keeping his old man on track, because I tend to rabbit hole things and go down a rabbit hole. we've got some more true crime coming up. If you like this genre, we have a case of a manhunt that lasts for years. We have another case of a crazy man who keeps trying to escape jail, and another case of a man who is sentenced to hang and escapes and assumes a new identity. Those are going to be coming up. Plus, I've got some cops and robber stories I want to share. Also, we're going to go into some Ozark storytelling coming up with Vance Randolph. I've alluded to this in the first episode, and we're going to be coming up with that, trying to find a mix. This, of course, is done for two reasons. One, I want to get all this stuff down, and I want to say what I want to say. Two, I want to hear what you say and what you contribute to this. So if you have something you think we need to explore or know or work on, please let me know. I'm just going to run down the list here. I'm interested in all things Ozarks. I'm interested in crime and cops and robbers and monsters and ghosts and Ozark mountain witches and blood stoppers and goomer doctors and con men and stories about treasure and outlaw stories and Civil War stories and Native American stuff. I'm very interested in that. And so if any of that, if you've got something you think we need to know about, let us know. We are happy to give that a spin. But for right now, I've kind of got the schedule set for the next few weeks. So hopefully these are going to be coming out more timely. And we look forward to seeing you here again. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Dick Cullen's sisters, Kate and Maud, ended up out west and back in Wisconsin. Dick Cullen's father, James, became a very wealthy man in Charles City, Iowa. He'd abandoned his family. He'd built this huge business, and he had never married until one day out of the blue he marries this woman with an adult son, and then one morning he kills them both. That night, a mob of hundreds take him from the Charles City jail, and they lynch him from the Charles City bridge. That is, kind of, I always want to make up some kind of coy remark here about the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but I think it probably hangs from the same branch. So, that happens to James Cullen. He dies. And then after the lynching was over, the St. Louis and the Springfield papers ran with a song that they had supposedly been penned by Dick Cullen. And let's see here, I'm going to pull it up. Here we go. Well, that's the wrong paper. So Dick Cullen, in spite of his inability to give answers that did not put the rope around his neck, in his spare time, ended up writing a song about his life, and it's really kind of strange. It's in the Springfield Democrat, and it is February 27th, 1892, page 5, Springfield Democrat.